Hello, econ students. This is going to be a real short PowerPoint video. It's about 15 or 16 minutes, so kind of short, not real short, but 15, 16 minutes on the government interventions and price controls note sheet. There's an electronic version available for you on the lesson plan if you want to do that, but I would strongly encourage you to use the pen to paper notes. We're going to be filling in some blanks, and you're going to be filling that in as we kind of follow along. Okay, so let's begin. When we started this, before I asked you to jump into this, I asked you to think about who the government should help when it comes to drug companies, right? Should the government set out to help support the drug companies to allow them to innovate and create more medicines that help us, right? Or should they set out to help us as consumers or insurance companies that are paying for these drugs, but they continue to get more and more expensive, right? You see this PowerPoint here, and I don't know if you could see where it finishes off at the top, but it ends up at $609. EpiPens, right? EpiPens are these pens that we have a lot of them here in school, that if a student is having or a teacher is having an allergic reaction and going into what's called anaphylactic shock, right? You take the EpiPen and you jam it into their leg, and it allows them to kind of come out of whatever reaction they're having. The alternative to having an EpiPen is not having an EpiPen. It's a patented product, right? So there isn't any alternatives out there. And so the alternative is bad news medically, possibly death, right? And so people, when they're having anaphylactic shock, would pay just about anything to make sure that they survive. And the makers of the EpiPen realize this, and notice how they start kind of jacking up the prices to the point where nothing's changed about the EpiPen, but it's almost $500 more per dose than it was, or a 2-pack than it was only like 7 years ago, which is pretty interesting to think about, right? I don't know if you know who this guy is. This is Martin Shkreli. He's known as the Pharma Bro. He's got one of the most punchable faces that you'll ever see in this class. I mean, that guy just, like, he's the guy that teased everybody in junior high. Anyway, so what he did, and I don't want to editorialize too much, but what he did here was just obnoxious. He owned a company. He's a venture capitalist, right? And there was a company that was making Daraprim. And Daraprim is a pharmaceutical that essentially eases the pain that AIDS patients feel, right? Makes their quality of life better. Well, this company, tiny little company making this in 2013, was charging $13.50 a pill, right, for this drug that made the life of AIDS patients easier, right? This guy comes along with his venture capitalist money, buys out the company in 2014, and look what he did to the price of the drug, right? It was a patented drug. There's no alternatives. That company had something that he wanted, that people needed, and he went ahead and jacked up the price all the way up to $750, right? Which makes you ask the question and go back to that initial reflection that I had you do. Who's the government setting out to help? The producers or the consumers? And should government set price controls on pharmaceuticals? And think about that for a few minutes, all right? And reflect on your answer. We're going to go ahead and move forward with the government involvement. So now we're going to actually start with our note sheet right here, right? The government involvement really comes into play when they try to intervene in the free market. And a free market, go into our notes here, a free market is a market where there is zero government involvement in the market, right? We don't have that here in the United States for the most part, okay? But that example that I put in the notes, right? When you're in the lunchroom, go back to like third grade, right? And you're in the lunchroom and you have a fruit roll up and your friend has Little Debbie zebra cakes, which is like heaven in a bag. I mean, those things are fantastic, right? And you got the fruit roll up and your friend's got zebra cakes and you say, hey, you want to trade for my fruit roll up for your zebra cakes? And your friend says, yes. Awesome, right? And you make that transaction, but like the lunch ladies or the lunch supervisors didn't get involved. That is a free market, right? And there was no involvement. It was two traders, a buyer and a seller coming together with no government intervention. Boom. Trade happened, awesome, and go you got zebra cakes. All right, so that is a free market. But what we're going to look at in this PowerPoint are the three different ways that the government can kind of get involved in these free markets. And the first one is price controls, which are price floors and price ceilings. We're going to study that first. Okay, so that's the first one, price floors and price ceilings. Those are price controls. The second one is subsidies, and the third one is taxes or excise taxes. Okay, so those are what we're going to be looking at over the next, say, 10 minutes or so, probably a little bit longer because you're going to stop and draw some graphs. But that's where we're headed in this PowerPoint. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about price controls. Right? Who likes the idea of having a price ceiling? In other words, a maximum price, so gas prices will never go over $1 a gallon. That's pretty awesome, right? I mean, we would never have to pay $1. Every single one of you is like, yeah, I like that idea, right? There's some problems that exist with that. So let's talk a little bit about how a price ceiling works, right? First, let's get a working definition. A price ceiling is the maximum legal price, right? You can't go higher than the ceiling. Okay, so it's the maximum legal price a seller can charge for a product. And the goal of a price ceiling is to make the good affordable by keeping the price from reaching equilibrium quantity or equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price, right? So that's the goal for that, right? And so real quick, as we're taking notes through all this too, if I'm moving too fast, go ahead and hit pause or go ahead and hit back 30 seconds and stuff like that. And you could always, get the notes that you may have missed. So I just kind of a quick tip on that one. Okay, so maximum legal price, the goal is to make it affordable by keeping the price from actually reaching the equilibrium, right? And if you take a look at that graph right there, gas at $1 is not equilibrium. Gas at $3 is the equilibrium, which is about where we are now. I'm going to move this over here so we can get a little bit more view of the graph. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to sketch on the next page of your notes. You're going to sketch the market for gasoline that you see right here on your screen. So go ahead, hit pause, and sketch this graph out now. Okay. Now that you've hit pause, we're going to move on to price ceilings. We're actually going to draw a price ceiling on here, right? So what we're going to do is just now draw an effective price ceiling on the graph and label it price ceiling. So what at $2, we're going to use $2 in this case. You're going to draw that straight line all the way across. Do that now. Okay. With an effective price ceiling, the quantities supplied, right, which is right here where $2 intersects the supply line, the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. The quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. And price ceilings usually end up with a shortage of goods, right? A shortage. So we're producing 20. Notice that we're producing 20 right here, but we're demanding 50. So we're 30 short. We're 30 short. Okay. Indicate that shortage on the graph. So in order to indicate that shortage on a graph, what you're going to do is you're going to shade the triangle from equilibrium down to the price ceiling, right? And make a triangle just like that. Shade that triangle right there. Go ahead and do that. Okay, as a result of shortages, black markets start to show up for a good, right? And there's legal black markets and there's illegal black markets. A legal black market is if there's a shortage of tickets for, say, a sporting event or a concert, StubHub exists, right? And people can kind of trade not using Ticketmaster or not using the box office, you use StubHub, right? Then there's also kind of illegal black markets, right? I can think of an example of when they first passed the law that said only diet pop allowed in the high school. There was a couple of budding entrepreneur Grays Lake Central students who bought the real cans of pop, right? The non-diet pop, and would sell it out of their locker because the kids could get actual good pop instead of the diet pop that they were selling down in the cafeteria. So that was also a black market. That got shut down kind of quick too. All right. But here's the important part. To have an effect, right, a price ceiling must be below the equilibrium. All right. If you go back and take a look, see that price ceiling is below. It's at 2, right, where the equilibrium is at 3. So that price ceiling is below the equilibrium price. Okay, we're going to move on to price floor now. Right? Get a good working definition of price floor. A price floor is the minimum legal price a seller can sell a product. It's the minimum. A price floor is the minimum. Can't get lower than the floor, right? Can't get lower than the floor. It's the minimum legal price a seller can sell a product. And the goal is to keep the price artificially high, and so keeping it above and keeping it from falling down to the equilibrium. Okay. Same rules apply here. Take a second, sketch that graph for corn that you see here right now. Go ahead and hit pause and sketch that graph. Okay, we sketched the graph. Good job. Now we're going to draw the price floor. Remember, the price floor is above. It's above the equilibrium. So we're going to draw it at 4. Take a second, draw that price floor, draw a straight line across, and label it PF. Okay, with an effective price floor, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Look, at $4, the quantity supplied is 40. The quantity demanded is 20. Quantity supplied is 40. The quantity demanded is 20, right? And price ceilings usually end up in a surplus. And there it is, surplus right there. And you can indicate that by also shading the triangle right through there. Okay, shade the triangle. When you start at the equilibrium and you go up to the price floor, and you shade that triangle right through there. And that's how the price floors help. Does this policy help corn producers? Yeah, it allows them a lot more money for their goods. The problem is they have a hard time selling it, which is why we buy up a whole bunch of corn and store it and pass it out, through government welfare programs and things like that. To have an effect, the price floor must be above the equilibrium, all right? Above the equilibrium. And that's kind of confusing, right? Because you think the floor is going to be below and the ceiling is going to be above. But in econ, it's opposite land. The floor is above the equilibrium and the ceiling is below, right? So the cheesy dad joke I make is, think about economics in Australia. Everything's upside down, right? Get it? Because they're on the other side of the world. It's the same thing. Price floor is going to be above the equilibrium. Price ceiling is going to be below. Okay, so let's move on to the next question here, or the next questions here. Take a second. In a moment, hit pause. Go ahead and answer these 2 questions, and then I'll be back with the answers. Go ahead and hit pause. Answer these questions now. Okay, so number 1, which of the following will occur if a legal price floor is placed on a good below a free market equilibrium, right? Well, the equilibrium price, the right answer here is the equilibrium price will remain the same. So let's think about this for a second. If a legal price floor, remember floor is minimum, is placed below its free market equilibrium, let's assume that the free market equilibrium is $3. Let's go back to gasoline. It's $3. And the government steps in and says, you can sell gas for no less than $2. Okay, well, it's no less than $2. Is $3 less than $2? No. So that equilibrium price will stay the same, right? And then question 2, what you have happening here is answer C. It's a misallocation of resources. It's a misallocation of resources. We're either not producing enough and we need to produce more, or we're producing too much and we need to produce less. So the right answer there is C. Okay, let's move on to subsidies. All right, subsidies are pretty interesting here. It's literally when the government gives producers money for the production of a good. Right? And the goal for these producers is to make more of the good that the government deems important by lowering the cost of production. So if the government says, hey, for every flu shot you give, we're going to give you some money. For every electric vehicle we're going to give you some money. For every college student that you could send to college kids, you're going to get some money so we can lower the cost of going to college, and universities, you're going to get some money from the government to make sure that those kids get a good education, right? So some examples like I just talked about, agriculture, corn, right? We're going to produce as much corn as we possibly can, food as possibly can. Pharmaceutical companies, I just talked about flu shots, right? Take a look around the next time you're driving around. Every place has flu shot. Get your flu shot here, get your flu shot here, get your flu shot here, right? That's because the government subsidizes those companies and says, hey, if you get a flu shot, right, we're going to give you a little bit of money to give that flu shot. We're going to cover the cost of it. All right. All of the COVID vaccines are subsidized. through the federal government too. You don't have to pay for any of the COVID vaccines at all. Those are subsidies given to Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson for the production of those production of those vaccines. Environmentally safe vehicles, we talked about that with electric vehicles, and FAFSA, which allows you to get into college and supports you into getting into college with your federal application for financial student aid. You fill that out, and then the government says, hey, we're going to subsidize your college education with these loans or these grants or scholarships or things like that. All right, so what does it look like? Take a second and sketch that corn market below. Now, before you do that, I want you to notice we got P and Q labeled on the graph here on the screen, but your graph has numbers on it. So you can make your equilibrium wherever you want. That's totally fine, but go ahead and take a second, sketch this graph out on your graph. Now hit pause. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to subsidize the production of corn, right? And so it's going to make the production cheaper. And so when we do that, we're going to shift supply to the right. We're going to increase supply. So remember, subsidies impact the production of a good and therefore shift the supply line. And so take a second and sketch the impact of that subsidy on your graph. Go ahead and hit pause. Notice that the price has gone down and quantity's gone up. So it's cheaper to produce, it's cheaper to sell, and we're making more of it. And subsidies there are effective in that case. Okay. All right, last one. There it is. Okay, last one, excise taxes, right? An excise tax is a per unit tax on producers. It's on producers. And per unit taxes tax producers on every unit that they make, every unit that they make, every car, every cigarette, whatever, right? Every item of every ton of pollution, okay, every unit that they make. And the goal here for excise taxes is the government's trying to get the producers to make less of the goods because the government deems them dangerous or unwanted, right? We don't want pollution. Cigarettes are unhealthy. Alcohol is unhealthy. Gambling could technically be unhealthy. Marijuana is unhealthy, right? And so we're going to tax the heck out of those and make it more expensive for the producers to produce and the consumers to consume. All right, some examples. We just talked about cigarettes, which is a sin tax. They call it a sin tax because it's unsavory to smoke, right? Alcohol, same thing. We're going to tax alcohol. That's a sin tax. Gambling, marijuana, those are sin taxes as well, right? Tariffs on imported goods coming in from overseas. We don't want goods coming in from overseas because we want to protect American workers, right? And then environmentally unsafe products, things that produce pollution and the like. You could go ahead and list a couple of those out as well. Right? So what does it look like on the graph? Well, here's what it looks like. Take a second. We're going to draw some cigarette graph. We're going to draw the graph of cigarettes. Take a second and draw this graph now. Hit pause. Okay. All right. And so then what we're going to do, remember, taxes impact the producers, right? So if you take a look at the supply schedule on the left, okay, if we were to put a $2 tax, all of a sudden the price dumps from $5 to $7, $6 to $4, $6, $3 to $5, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to shift supply to the left. It's going to shift supply to the left. All right. And after taxes, take a look. What happened to equilibrium price? It went up from $3 to $4. So after taxes, equilibrium price went up. And after taxes, equilibrium quantity went from 100 down to 80. Right? So the goods became more expensive to produce and consume, so we consumed less of them, right? And that's the goal of those taxes. We want to consume, the government wants us to consume less of these goods, and they want producers to produce less of these goods. And so if they tax it, that's exactly what's going to happen, right? And just real quick, you can notice the tax is the vertical distance between the supply curves, right? We go from $3 to $5, right? But in this case, it only impacts the price $1, right? And so that's it. That is government interventions and price controls. If you've got any questions, you could always drop me an email, or you could go back and rewatch this as many times as you want. All right. So hope you enjoyed that, and bring that back over here. Hope you enjoyed that. If you got questions, you could always send me an email or ask me, or you could always rewatch this video. All right. Till